Astaghfirullah, inshallah. Let's start with the Fatiha, inshallah. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin ar-rahmanir rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdinas siratal mustaqim. Siratal ladzina an'amta 'alayhim ghayril maghdubi 'alayhim wad-dallin. Amin. Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم اني اسالك علما نافعا. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us toward his best, to choose for us, to bring us the reinforcements into our institutions that we need to deliver the quality of education and upbringing of our next generation of children and next generation of talent, and next generation of leaders, inshallah. We ask Allah to choose for us what is best for us and to implement those things that are best for us, since we have neither the full knowledge or complete knowledge nor the complete power to control our destinies as much as we like to work on these projects. So assalamu alaikum. We hope that this this session is interactive. We hope that we can connect, inshallah. The most important thing is we connect and build relationships. And, we can follow up always with those relationships with questions, inshallah. So if you're able to share your camera, I know sometimes in the privacy of our homes, we're not always able to share the cameras, and that's okay. But if anyone has ever taught on Zoom or given talks on Zoom knows how strange it is to have a bunch of black screens, but it is what it is. And, we respect that privacy if folks need to maintain that. But if you're able to join us, please do. This is, I think the question has already been asked, but we'll ask it again. Did anyone attend this session in the past? And I asked this primarily to decide how we're going to start. If we're going to start from the beginning or we're going to get into the middle of it and skip over some things that we all may have already heard. The title, recruiting, retaining, evaluation of our leader, the school principal, is a subject, and we've given this talk primarily to boards, but also sometimes to administrators, and principals themselves have also participated in this. So let's share a little bit of who's listening. Are you a board member? Are you an administrator? Are you a principal? Where are you coming from in that sense? And what school are you coming from? Some of you have already shared. So where are you coming from? What do you hope to gain out of this? Please, whether you speak up or whether you message in the chat, I would love to see some of that, inshallah. So,
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
My name is Anita. I'm from the Albandita School of Richmond, Virginia, and I'm the board member, board chair.
Alhamdulillah. Ahlan wa sahlan. Welcome. Good to have you.
Thank you. Thankful to have this session.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. We have some principals. Assalamu alaikum. Our school principals are here. Also, most have not attended the session. We have a board member from Memphis. I think if you're from Pleasant View, please give my salam to Saira there, who I think is on the board there. We have some from Richmond, from Bayan Academy in Tampa, from Vancouver, Canada, inshallah. Oklahoma City board chair. Okay, very good. And, I think the reason we're attending this is, one of the things that we run into in our boards and as principals is that part of it has to do with just a board principal dynamic, and this is not unlike stuff that we see in the masajid as well, where you have a board and you have an imam, and that dynamic of what's that appropriate relationship. And so we had given this presentation, and I'm going to briefly go over some of this. The slide that has the two bars, kind of the next slide after this one, kind of shows you a little bit of where people are coming from with this. If you just slide up, I think it's just a PDF, so you can just slide it, I think. Yeah, so the question is evaluation or hiring slash recruiting. These both things come up, and sometimes they're intertwined, sometimes they're not. The majority of folks that came to this session were interested in just what is the evaluation supposed to look like, and some were interested in some leadership change, and they were looking at hiring or recruiting. We go into the next slide, and when they talk about evaluations, what we talked about was innamal a'malu binniyat, like the idea of the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, narrated by Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, in which the crux of the matter is the intention. Every action according to an intention. And sometimes when we do these evaluations, or we're recruiting or hiring, we just have to really take a deep breath and sit back and look at the picture from outside eyes, of what's really happening, what's the dynamic, is there the sincerity of the exercise? Because at the end of the day, when we are doing evaluations of a principal, are we doing it from a productive, helpful, beneficial perspective, or are we doing it a little bit kind of trying to pick out flaws? And they may sound like the same thing, but they're kind of nuanced. They're different in a lot of the nuance. So when we're trying to develop and evaluate our principals, we're trying to make them better. And when we are principals, interacting with the board, we're trying to make the institution better. The goal here is to create really phenomenal schools. Like the biggest objective here is to create really excellent institutions of learning for the next generation, for children. And therefore, the board has a role to play in that. The principal has a major role to play in that. And all of our teachers and all of our parents and all of our students have a role to play in that. And so the evaluation is a key piece in trying to determine, like when the student takes a class, the reason we give exams is to kind of have an idea, is like, was it effective? Like, is the teaching effective? Is the student's effort been up to par? Is the content been mastered, or is the content been transferred? And we have to be able to measure success somehow, and the evaluation is part of that. So in the next slide, we look at some intentions, or 2 slides down. There's some bars there, and there's some answers that people had given about why they were trying to do that. And then you see a lot of it has to do with kind of ensure the growth, ensure following the rules, ensure accountability, ensure performance. And a lot of it is just to try to find out, can we validate this with some sort of empirical data perspective versus just subjective analysis, or just, so there is this deep desire to kind of have a hard, concrete scoring system. And I guess it's just not that easy. It's not that easy as we get into the meat of it. I would argue the following slide, and again, I'm going through this quicker because it's not the actual session. This is kind of a follow-up, and so I'm trying to just bring us up to speed. The next slide in here is that what I would suggest our evaluation process, come from is a place of sincere din al-nasiha, this idea of sincere counsel, honest advice that's two-way, that can kind of get to the heart of what that like a problem-solving mentality. A sincere advice, and advice is something that you give to ones you love. It comes from a deep place of love. It comes from a deep concern for the akhirah. It comes from a deep concern of the institution. It's not something that's, procedural or bureaucratic or vindictive, or coming from a place of control or a place of authority. It's coming from a sincere love and a deep commitment to the betterment of the Ummah of the Prophet ﷺ. And I think that's an important thing, because I think sometimes in the process of the power dynamic between boards and principals and staff, is this issue of control, and the issue of a lot of folks, when we're on the boards, it's there because we've accomplished something in life that people value, or that we value. And sometimes that gives us a sense that, all of our experiences will come to fruition through a certain thing that worked for us in another setting, whether it be as physicians, as business people. And, each industry and each ecosystem is different. Education isn't the same sometimes as business or corporate America or Amazon or Google or wherever it is we're coming from. It has its own technical realities. It has pedagogical approaches. It has studies that have been done on in a lot of data that's been analyzed, and a lot of approaches and techniques and methodologies and differences of opinion. And so the granular content mastery of all of that is critical to a healthy and appropriate and competent evaluation of the principal. If we're coming to the principal with evaluations that we found at the hospital or Google, and we think that we can apply that to something that's very technical, which is education, and education in which children are very different from one another. Genetically, they're different. Culturally, they're different. Environmentally, they're different. They have different strengths and different weaknesses. There's a differentiation reality. And and sometimes, I can say that many times as a teacher myself, I've taught something, and sometimes the crowd gets it, sometimes the crowd doesn't get it. And and when the ones who got it, I taught them the same way as the ones who didn't get it. And the idea is like, how do you, now we have to use a different approach maybe for other students, and the same goes in every single thing. And so my biggest advice in this is, to come at it with some humility, and come at it with some technical curiosity, and come at it with some variety of approach, and not a one size fits all, and measuring that against other things that we're going to talk about, inshallah. If we go down a little bit, and I'm going to stop here for a second to open up with some questions just to get the discussion going. But the other thing I would say is, each school that's here and represented is trying to do something not identical to one another. So some schools may value discipline and organization more, and some may value creativity more, and some are trying to produce technical folks, and some are trying to produce creative folks, and some are trying to produce college prep, and some are trying to do this, and some are trying to do that. Meaning our missions and visions, although all of us have the collective agreement of Islam in the Quran and the Sunnah, that binds us. That's why we're all here in CISNA. But how we actually implement that according to our own, values and vision, and the particularity of the breadth and the variety that's there in our communities, will produce different schools and different fits in terms of leadership. Different people will be, some people will fit in this and some that. An example of that would be if you just look at things like Harvard or Stanford or Yale or Chicago or University of Tennessee or University of Texas. They're going to require different teams of people, because culturally they're different institutions that a person could be extremely competent, but that fit may not always be perfect. And that's not to say that we can't learn and improve and be better. I'm always going to advocate for development over change for a variety of reasons. Developing people, developing our talent, not necessarily trying to always run to the easiest solution, which is to break the relationship and to go in a different direction constantly, right? I think there was a slide that's further down. It's a graphic of a ring. If you can see that, there's a graphic a few down. And I wanted to start here before I go back into the specifics of the evaluation. And it goes to show just how one of the challenges at a board level is this ring down here, right here. How many principals has your school had in the past year? And I've given this talk in different times, and this comes from a very particular cohort, so it's not every single time it's like this, but this particular cohort, when they answered the survey question, if you look at how many in 10 years, if you look at 3, 4, and 5 people maybe in 10 years, you were looking at, about 40% of the schools had a decent amount of turnover. Only in about half, 60%, we're able to say 1 or 2, right? And so the other thing about why evaluation, less about hiring, is that inevitably we already have principals, and if the answer is always, if we're dissatisfied as board members or communities that we're always looking for improvement, we can find ourselves going into this cycle of constant change, which sometimes can lead to sometimes can lead to our organizations being designated as not healthy places to work if you're constantly changing. The principals and people who are looking for those positions want stability. And if we change too often, it can become kind of like we can blacklist ourselves as places where people don't necessarily want to come into. I will give you two final examples before I go into the specifics, and I'll stop for some questions and specifics of an evaluation. But I'll give you an example. This probably is not a great example, and I apologize. But in one industry that's notorious for change is college football coaching. It's the college football coaches are the highest paid government employees in the country. Every state's most highest paid. If you look at the highest paid person in Tennessee or Texas or California that works for the government, it's always the football coach. The football coaches have $100 million contracts, these crazy contracts, and but the board of regents, the board of governors, the board of trustees is always making changes to those. And what's interesting is Ohio State, Columbus, Ohio, they lost to Michigan. For those of you guys who know Michigan and know Ohio State and the rivalry they have, they lost to their rival, and Ohio State fan base, the administrators, the everybody turned on the head coach, and they were committed to getting rid of the head coach. They're like, this is just proof, we can't. He's always in the top 5. He's always, scoring really well on the data and the metrics, but he can never win the biggest moments. And so they're like, we need to make a change. Was going to fire the staff, was going to fire the coach. And at the end of the season, everyone committed to getting rid of this guy. And by the end of the season, he won the national championship. And it was ubiquitously like there was a lot of consensus on getting rid of him, or at least a huge amount of public outcry, as well as the actual administrators also were like, we probably need to make a change at this point. The writers, and this guy was only weeks away from winning the national championship. And that, says some things about patience and sentiment and gut instinct versus development and patience, and waiting for things to play out. So that's the moral of the story is that there are not a lot of principals out there, like the universe that we live in, the American ecosystem is not producing a huge number of principal candidates that are getting their master's in educational leadership, that are having 5-10 years of experience, that have been in the teaching role and then have run, very successful schools, and that are also looking for a new job. Meaning like a lot of the boards are always looking for people who have check all those boxes, and generally people who are looking for these positions might be a little greener, might be a little bit wet behind the ears, may need a place to develop and grow. And they may not be just right out of the box ready to, in terms of the number of candidates versus the number of boards looking for principals, and the number of Islamic schools that will continue to open throughout the country as our communities get larger, and the number of Islamic schools that will continue to open and expand due to vouchers and charters and other ways that the government is starting to pay for private education. So the demand that our communities have for Islamic schools is going to outstrip our ability to from a supply side, both in terms of buildings, facilities, teachers, and principals. So it's just an important data point that we should be aware of. So I'm going to pause. I've been talking for a long time. I'm going to go over the evaluation in the second half, but I do want to just start off by fielding any comments or questions that you may have that you want answered in the second portion. So sorry for all of that, but I just want to kind of tone set a little bit. Yes, Sister Tammy.
Sorry, given the last thing that you just shared about the need exceeding the supply, is there something that I was pulled from within, so internal. I was a teacher who the board approached because we needed somebody who would stick around and would do a good job. And this is a long time ago. But is there an approach? Is there a plan for how we can support this? Because I do think that you know, a lot of the factors that lead people to go to public schools or other places, you know, remain. And so you have to be very committed to community. And then you also need boards to support and appreciate you. So how do we address this? I know that's what your talk's going to be about, but is there a way to address even like the ability to train and to support people who might be interested?
Yeah, I think that's the right question. It's the right way to think about it. Because it's a policy level discussion, right? And so, you know, and I think CISNA, the very fact that it's happening here is the testament to why CISNA exists. CISNA exists to create this ecosystem of discussion and development and improvement of our Islamic schools in the ecosystem that our Islamic schools operate in, and the cross-pollination of ideas, and also in the accreditation of all that. So, you know, one thing I do always mention, and I'm going to keep on mentioning it every single time I see her, is Sophia. I keep saying this, is this unique individual who has visited more Islamic schools than anyone else. Like there's not like a bunch of people. There's not like 20 people who've been to 50 or more Islamic schools. There's not 20. There's not 5.
90.
There's not. What's that? 90 Islamic schools. So they're meaning, like, if you said, okay, name me 5 people who visited 30 or more Islamic schools, and the answer is like, we can't. There's actually only one person who is visited Islamic schools and probably is just the holder. You know,
that we know of. There might be, I don't know.
But I think this is an important issue, is that we do need to visit a lot of Islamic schools and a lot of schools in general. I think that you really don't know the bubble you're living in until you visit another school and 4 or 5 or 6 Islamic schools, and you start getting a sense of the variety and the different approaches and the different ideas and the things that work and the things that don't work. The closest we have is visiting one another in forums like this, right? Like we come to assist an event, or we come to an event like this, and we might visit while we're visiting the conference. We might go to an Islamic school to visit them. We get a little bit of that. But I think one way to increase bandwidth and knowledge, especially for our principals, is for them to visit other Islamic schools and participate in CISNA's accreditation process as facilitators or helpers. When you go to school and you help evaluate next to Sophia, you will see you'll start viewing it at a 10,000 foot level, and you'll start analyzing it from a policy perspective and a improvement perspective versus the immediate problems that we always are trying to deal with at a board level or discussion level. That's one thing. Another thing is, we have to systematically and intentionally, at every location that there's an Islamic school, develop the next leadership pipeline. And that means finding people who, you know, have this, you know, factor that differentiates them. You know, there's another slide in here that says people are the Hadith of Prophet, which he says that people are like mines of gold and silver. We have to be mining, not for fundraising for just money and not just for facilities, but for talent. We have to just be looking for talent all the time. Really, you know, if you read Good to Great and a lot of the work of Jim Collins, you know, Stanford Business School, and talks about organizational science, a big component in improving any system, whether that be a masjid or a corporation or a school or a hospital, is about talent acquisition, right? Like we have to acquire talent in order to build better systems. You can't just be buying textbooks or buying curriculum or working on policies and procedures or bureaucracies. It has to be, you find a really phenomenal teacher who's passionate, who loves the kids, who's committed to the work, and we have to just keep recruiting them, but we also have to invest in them, and we have to prioritize pay and compensation and health insurance, and we have to start prioritizing the things that are necessary in order to build stable institutions and stable work environments. But also we have to, you know, send them and get their masters. You know, we have to get need to go get their masters in educational leadership. They have to get their masters in education. They have to be exposed to the theory. They have to do the work, and not just be satisfied with coming in, coming out, attending, you know, workshop here and there. It has to be a real commitment. And the Islamic seminaries, you know, nationally, I'm going to a conference soon with them in August. and this thing has been brought up, is like, as we develop these seminaries into larger and larger institutions, they need to have departments of education within them. Like they have to be conferring degrees for Islamic studies and Arabic and all the sciences of Islam, but also just the general sciences, so that people can go and become this as a career. And we have to just invest in this pipeline of education. If we're really going to try to, there's a reason that the last time that revelation comes to humanity, it starts with this call to read in the name of your Lord, right? Like the last time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to talk to humanity, he's not going to do it again. He's done it multiple times. This is the last time. The verses that he brings first in that revelation of the Quran is read in the name of your Lord. And so, and that's a commitment. And we have to return to that commitment and prioritize that commitment, because right now we do prioritize things, meaning there's not a resource problem with the Muslim community. The Muslim community is not like other communities that are deeply impoverished in the United States or have suffered hundreds of years of oppression and hundreds of years of being pushed down. And in many cases, these are, immigrant communities that have been here for a few decades and have gone into the professional fields in business and medicine and engineering and et cetera. And the resources in terms of lifestyles and disposable income and houses and stuff, assets and 401ks and stocks is all there. So institutionally, we have to start thinking about, as a community, how do we do that? So I know that was just a lot of theoretical, just discourse on that, but all of those points are important. But the thing that I would like you to really zone in on for the purposes of this thing, the thing that you can control versus the harder ones, is that building pipeline of talent and prioritizing the recruitment of really talented people in your community to go into this work, or if they're in your institutions, to promote them or give them small opportunities of leadership, like give them, a team that they're in charge of, give them, a portion of, some additional responsibility, send them out for professional development, to really invest. If you can't, a budgetary item that you should really look at is your PD budgets. Because you can have a PD budget, let's say of $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, and that budget can impact your entire payroll, which might be $1.5, $2 million. So if you have like a $2 million payroll or a $700,000 payroll, paying for really solid, impressive PD can turn the dial on your entire team potentially. So all of those things can help, inshallah. I hope that was a pointing in the right direction, but good question, inshallah. Others? If not, we'll start with the evaluation. And what I would start is what I started in the other session, which is I want you guys all to take a minute to think about a bad evaluation. I'm talking about not a bad evaluation of a person. I'm talking about a process that's unhealthy. Like, think through what are things that you as a board, or if you're a principal, as what could go wrong in terms of like just tone deaf or demoralizing, demotivating evaluation. Like, what does that actually look like? Take a couple minutes to write down either specifics or characteristics of an evaluation that really is not up to par, not up to standard, not at the highest levels of ihsan that we look at, not at the highest levels of adab, that we hear about the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Like, think through that a little bit. Take a few minutes, and then I want you guys to share with me, versus me talk through that. I want you to share with me some things that came to your head as you tried to do that exercise. All right. Someone want to share an idea that they had? Yes, this is the evaluation of the principal, because fundamentally that's what the session is. You know, a lot of the questions that we get, it's just at the board level is questions around how do we do an evaluation of a principal, or what's the best way or best practice for that, or what can we do? Sophia brings a good one. Like, we just don't do it. You know, the simplest answer is we don't do evaluations. Like, we
Or
just
we
don't do it.
just do it at the end of the year, and then it's like, what's the point? This, you know,
We do, yeah, we do it in there to wrap things up,
Yeah.
and you know, but it doesn't have any impact. Anyone want to throw one out there that you can type it into the chat? You could speak up. Feel free.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
So demoralizing would be if it's not constructive. Nobody is perfect, and we can always evaluate or observe on daily basis. Not that we have intention to, but just like keeping an eye. But when small things becomes like, oh, this happened and that happened, and like just being negative. So that is more like demoralizing, because sometimes it does happen that when personality does not match, or people have different objectives, and they are not on the same page because of the different objectives, things can clash. And then from the beginning is the negativity.
Yeah, and I think that's the point that you're saying. Just negativity and nitpicky is kind of not what we want, right? Like, negativity just demoralizes everybody. And if we're trying to build a school in which we're trying to promote confident children, we need teachers who are going to be positive with the kids. And if we want teachers to be positive, we need principals who are positive with their teachers, and productive, not negative. And that means that we need boards who aren't demoralizing and nitpicking in a way that's just unhealthy. There's just or just constantly critiquing it. And like you also mentioned another very important point, which is a lot of this is an opinion, right? Like, there are a lot of different ways to do things, and a lot of times when we say things that this is how it should be, those are just opinions. They're not necessarily facts. That might be how I want to do things. That might be how I personally think they should be done. But sometimes we articulate our opinions as facts, and we don't differentiate that this is my opinion is we should do this, not necessarily that this is the only way it can be done. And therefore we start differing in matters of opinion, but we come at it as board members as a matter of fact, and that can be extremely demoralizing. Good, two very good points. Opinion, fact, also just critiquing, nitpicking. Not having a format like to follow with the scale, like meaning everything's subjective and there's no real formality to it. And so it's just like, how do you actually measure that? It's a very subjective conversation that doesn't have like some sort of objective metrics that can also do things. And remember, every ecosystem is imperfect, right? So our goal should be to be better. There was actually this this coach, and I'll give you another athletic example. There was a coach coaching this student athlete, and the student athlete raced their race, and they finished dead last place. And the coach comes up and says, "Hey, that's a great run." And the student athlete says, "What are you talking about? I finished last place." He said, "But look at your time. That's your personal record. Like, you ran faster today than you've ever run, meaning you've improved." And if the goal becomes constant improvement, like every day we get better, every day we get better, every day we get better, the question is like, are we moving in the right direction? Are we moving in the right direction at a speed that's appropriate to the level of success or failure that we're seeing? Are we prioritizing every single thing simultaneously? Or are we finding areas that are the most important to all of us collectively, and being able to focus on those areas versus trying to like nitpick every single thing? Yes, all of that is there. What else?
So I was actually wondering how many people on the call are board members, because I think the questions you're asking, maybe it's the board members who need to hear because they're the ones who are doing the evaluation. But if I have mostly principals on this call, and if we hear that either you're not being evaluated, or the way you're being evaluated is not the best way, we need to maybe talk about how you need to get this to your board members. I want to be evaluated, and here's how you can evaluate me, because maybe the board needs to learn. So sorry if you guys are board members out there, and if you're doing a great job, that's great. But if you're principals out there and you're not getting evaluated, and you're going to hear from Brother Nadeem what the best methods are, you're going to have to take it to the board and be proactive about saying, you have to evaluate me, and this is how to do it.
Yeah, and I think one thing to understand as board members and as principals is the board are volunteers, and they're volunteers from a variety of fields, and the education may or may not be their field, right? Depending on how the recruitment was. A healthy board actually has a lot of donors. Like, just to be frank, if you look at books of best practice, you want a certain percentage of your board to be technically competent in the areas of need, and you want a certain percentage of your board to be really good financially, that they can network and rally the community and support the project and be its champion and to fundraise, right? And sometimes, you as the principal are the technical educational expert, the leader, the educational leader in the building. And that also includes, guiding the board on best practices, even when it comes to your own evaluation, in the sense that they may not have the time or the expertise, or they may or may not be here. And therefore, if that this is the system that we all agree on, you bring some, options to them and some proposals about, here's some choices that we have, and then you kind of agree to what that evaluation is going to look like and how frequently, and you ensure that it's being done, because you're paid, leader versus versus the volunteer board who, it's hit or miss. So we'll get into the formal evaluation, and let's just start talking about some of that.
So there's a question. Do you want to take?
Yeah, sure. Where it said, how often, the ideal number, is it the BOD, the only authority should, like the principal should? So I'll talk through that in the actual,
Okay.
because I think both of these come to some of this. There's a formal and the informal processes of improvement, right? So formality is critical for bureaucracy and for officialness, right? Like, it's also important because there's like this dedicated moment where this is what we're going to do. Frequency helps if you're going to reports, for example, in finance, you can adjust faster when you're measuring more often. However, the trade-off is time and the degree in which you're going to go into it, and the capacity, right? So when schools start, principals are at the beginning of the year, they're trying to get this thing going. They're trying to get the plane into the air. And then they hit cruising altitude and they're dealing with what they're dealing with. And then they're landing the plane. And you have to pick a time when's the most appropriate, where it's most beneficial for improvement, whether that be at the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, the end of the year, something of that nature. Whether that be in the summertime, a recap of what the year just went by and what we're coming up into the future. And this thing has to be bolted together with your strategic plan, your mission, your vision, your values. Like, all of this has to tie together. Meaning, if your goals are, you have certain type of academic goals, or some type of recruitment goals, or some type of hiring goals, then, and if that's what you've agreed upon, then your evaluation should address your strategic goals to some degree or another. Like, if you're doing an evaluation, for example, teaching to the test, if you are evaluating your students, but the evaluation at the end of the year, the exam that they take, does not bolt to the curriculum, there's going to be disparity in outcome, right? Like, a lot of times, if you've determined that we're going to evaluate our system this way, or our students this way, then the curriculum should match that evaluation to some degree, if you're wanting there to be some parity between the evaluation process and the content that you're covering. It would be weird for a student to study for 6 weeks, and at the end, the exam doesn't have any of the questions that you covered. That there was no alignment between intent and observation. So one thing that we want to make sure is that our mission, vision, values, strategic plans, objectives that are collectively determined, not one person whimsically deciding, right? It's not the president whimsically deciding what it should be. It's just, there's a collective communal shareholder effort to determine the institutional and organizational objectives. And then we're going to evaluate based on some things that should be present everywhere, and some things that are present very locally in our particular situation, because that's what we decided to do. In terms of who's evaluating, I would say the person most qualified. Typically the principal reports to the president, so that is like a default generic answer. But if your board has different roles and responsibilities, and there's a more technically capable person who's more familiar with education or organizational science or institution building, then the person who is most appropriate, that's agreed upon, or whether that's a committee of this small number of people. But you can't have the entire board simultaneously evaluating the principal. It just becomes every personality is pulling them in different directions and giving a different thought. And now the principal's not really getting evaluated. They're just adjudicating the differences of opinion of so many different board members, right? It becomes a little chaotic.
Can I offer something right there?
Yes, please. 90 schools, you are the expert. So
No,
I always
no.
refer to that.
No, I was just thinking about who's doing the evaluating. I would ask people to consider that the principal self-evaluates based on a rubric and goals that have been agreed upon at the beginning of the year or when the contract was signed or something. So, a self-evaluation I think would be, because for a president of the board to evaluate, they would need to gather a lot of data, and they should figure out how to, but I think that the principal is in a good position, should be in a good position to say, this was the goal that I set for myself, that you set for me, and I agreed it with. Here's how I think I've done. And then the president say, okay, well, yes, we see that, or we would, you say that you've done it, but we don't see how it's manifested. So that might be something to add to.
Yeah, if you look at the fourth participatory or one directional, generally what happens is, like Sister Sophia said, what we do is the principal has set out objectives, and the board has, and then like she mentioned, what we will do is ask them to well, how do you feel like it went? And that's an important starting point. It's an important starting point. If we will look at and they can fill it out, and then at that point what it does, you as principals can kind of self-evaluate. You kind of can be honest with yourself, and then it gives the board does need an opportunity to agree or disagree, or to chime in, or to add feedback, or to bring up something that's been on their minds that you may not have realized, right? And so the participatory by all parties is critical, but the principal is the only person who's in that building every day in this evaluation, and has a perspective that's different than a board member. But the board member also has their ear to the ground and may hear things or see things from an angle or perspective that the principal may not be getting on a regular basis, or that may not be apparent to them. So I think everyone has to participate in that, but a good time saver, and also it reduces the awkwardness and the weirdness of the situation when the principal gets to start with the self-evaluation, because they can kind of break the ice with covering a lot of ground that doesn't need to be talked about, because they're already aware of it and they've got answers. So you don't have to nitpick. It prevents all the nitpicking, is if you allow the principal to go first, and to tell you what went well, what didn't go well, what are some things you want to change or improve upon. It kind of takes the elephant out of the room, the tension level down, and you feel like you have some agency in it. And it's just a lot of high edit in those kind of situations. The other things, it needs to be helpful. It needs to be big picture, unless there's something very specific that's repeatedly there. It needs to look at this from a 10,000 foot. And it needs to be developmental, not accountable basis. Like, meaning, yes, we're holding everyone accountable. That's a default answer. Like, that's a given. No one is getting away from that. But the tone needs to feel and be understood as developmentally improving versus I'm holding you accountable. Like, that's my job as the authority, is to hold you accountable, should not be the tone of the discourse. It's demeaning, it's demoralizing. The tone should be like, okay, here's institutionally where we want to improve, and here's some things that we're looking for. There are some suggestions that might be there, and what do you suggest, and just have a more frank conversation around that. I do want to, for the sake of time and just to make sure we cover all of our bases, I do want to go over some actual specific evaluation systems. I think there's a slide in here. So what I would say on this slide is there's a lot. There's a lot of evaluation systems, and they're in accordance to what's appropriate for you. So if you're in California, and you have certain state standards, or you're in the state of Tennessee and you have certain common systems in place that maybe a lot of the teachers that you recruit who worked in the public school are accustomed to some kind of system like this, then those are all things that you need to make. But Marzano has an evaluation, Interstate School Leaders Licensure Consortium has it, the Strong Leadership Effectiveness Performance Evaluation Model. You have TEAM here in Tennessee. There's the self-evaluation that Sophia talked about. There's a 360 feedback in which you even have your staff participate in the evaluation process, parents that participate in the evaluation. That has to be built, you know, in a certain type of way where you're getting feedback from all the different stakeholders. And then even your SWOT analysis, which are the strengths and weakness, opportunities and threat inventory system that you may do as an organization, are very effective at getting an institutional evaluation. And an institutional evaluation is very much an evaluation of the leader, right? Because if the school, for example, isn't clean, or if it's under-credentialed in terms of, or your teachers aren't licensed, or there's a lot of, there's very few Muslim teachers in your school, your SWOT analysis will bring forward all those institutional weaknesses. And that's something for the leader to take a look at, the education instructional leader, that here's where the institution is failing and who's most responsible for these improvement opportunities, other than the principal. And so all of those things can be used in a very formal process. So you can do, you know, and you can do a combination of these. You know, you're going to do self-evaluation and a SWOT and 360 and TEAM, for example. But it should be done in a very organized and not a very ad hoc way. It should be, you know, set dates and communicated properly, and people should see it coming, and no one's blindsided, and everyone has an opportunity, and it's documented, and it's, you know, put into a binder of some sort or in the file of some sort, so that we can all kind of go back and refer to it. And it's not just done and forgotten about, but it's done and then looked at, so that we can kind of institutionally move the system forward. So I did, and here's some domains. So domains are kind of areas, and there's an endless number of domains. So this is not a complete and total list of domains, but domains in which the principal is held responsible, is developmentally advised, is the one who is under whose dominion all of this happens. Leadership and vision. You know, is the principal providing a clear vision of the school and is aligning all of what's happening in the building with that vision? Or do we have this vision, but it doesn't actually translate at a granular level? Everyone's just doing their own thing ad hoc. You know, evaluation under that leadership of the style and effectiveness of motivating the staff and the students and the community, like make people want to be there. People really have a positive opinion of the thing. The principal is responsible for the culture of the building. Is the culture organized? Is the culture late or on time? Is the culture rigorous? Is the culture fun? Is the culture welcoming? Is the culture, and all the things, like, is the culture Islamic? You know, is the culture respectful? You know, all of those things, the principal is responsible for creating those things in terms of matters of culture and climate, so that it's a pleasant place to be. We keep scrolling down and take a look at some of the other domains. The instructional leadership, the one of the most primary goals of the principal is they're the instructional leader of the building. You know, the kids are there to learn, whether that's learning math and science and English, whether that's learning Quran, Hadith, whether it's learning adab, whether that's learning, you know, the Qasas Anbiya, whether it's learning Arabic or languages. Ultimately, the instructional leader, they're the instructional leader. Therefore, are they developing the teachers? Are they providing PD? Are they observing the teachers, and are those observations effective? Are they building a great team? Are they coaching everybody? Are they meeting to solve problems? Are they looking at students who are falling behind, or students who are high achievers have the opportunity? So instructional leadership is a domain. Management operations, you know, is the place clean? Is curb appeal? You know, the bathrooms and everything functioning? Is the inventory there? Are the supplies that are necessary? So management operations of the whole system. Are we meeting the budget? Are we setting appropriate budgets? The board has, you know, responsibilities there, and so I don't want to completely throw the finance bucket onto the principal, but they're kind of responsible for making sure the trains run on time, essentially running the building and operations of the school. Let me scroll down, inshallah. You know, family and community engagement. Now we're starting to get into some domains where it makes it feel a little bit, you know, you start getting into all the granular stuff, and it goes on and on and on. But you know, we are community schools, we are Islamic schools in communities, and so unlike maybe private secular systems or public schools, we have a big component to community engagement. We have ethical and professional behavior. Is the ethical and professional behavior in the building at the level that we are expecting, that we've agreed upon, at the highest levels of ihsan? You know, we continue to go down the domains, inshallah. And I'm not reading every single bullet. I'm just giving you a taste of all these domains, and it goes on and it goes on. You know, recruitment. You know, there's a touch point on marketing in that, and so if you actually do like data and collections, you know, all of that, so you can actually do research on what are the domains of a principal, and you can look at Marzano, you can look at team, you can look at all the ones that we mentioned, and you can do some research and see what fits best. But also note that when you do something like this, it can get overwhelming. And one person is not doing all that as much as they're overseeing the doing of all that, right? So we should have bookkeeping, we should have accounting, we should have a finance business office, we should have administrative team, we should have educational leaders in elementary and middle and high, and we should have guidance columns. So the principal is not necessarily doing all this, but they're running the system that's doing all this, and they're the backbone of putting this team together and making sure that it's done. It's not that the principal has to do these things, it's the principal has to make sure these things are done. And so that's an important distinction, because we don't want to then make a principal feel like, oh my God, how is one human being supposed to do all this? Well, we should have, you know, vice principals, and we should have administrators, and we should have other things that are support staff, and that whole ecosystem. And then, you know, the board has to decide, you know, how much do we want to invest? How big is our school? And does it justify the investment of additional administrative costs, and on and on and on and on. So, you know, I'm going to stop there, but, you know, that there is a formality to it. It's not, there is a science to it, and there's hundreds and thousands of schools doing this all over the place. So there's a lot of opportunity of learning. You know, what I would say to each of us, like all of us, myself included, is read books on education, you know, read best practices, read research papers, visit schools, you know, go to conferences, go to both CISNA conferences and other conferences in education. Be in the ecosystem of education, so you're become an expert over time. Your curiosity and your himma and your fascination and your curiosity and your, as adult educator, you know, one thing I would say about schools are, first and foremost, they're educational places for adults. First and foremost, parents should learn about parenting, and parents should learn about education, and teachers should learn about education and pedagogy and leadership, and principals should learn, and board members should learn, and all of those adults learning all the time will trickle down and affect all the students in terms of the best possible ecosystem for their learning. So, you know, as we build schools, you know, don't think of them as just for kids. These are institutions of learning for the entire communities and adults. And if you can build, you know, that expertise through your own curiosity, like what makes a scholar great? Now I'll switch gears temporarily as we end to seminary. What makes a student great in a seminary is not just the teacher and the curriculum; it's the himma of the student themselves. It's what they bring. So a teacher like my teacher, Sheikh Hassan, you know, he may teach 3 or 4 or 5 different students simultaneously. Some will go far and some will go as far. Why? Because some will put in a lot of time. They're super curious. They're reading books on their own time. No one's telling them what to read. They just read. They're curious about hadith. They're curious about tafsir. They're curious about, and so we want our students to do well, which means that we have to be super curious in the field of education. We have to learn as much as we possibly can ourselves, and realize all the academic that goes into this, all the different types and techniques that go into this, and that So that when we come to our board meetings and we come to discussions with one another, we're talking at the highest levels of capability, not at a very base level. So inshallah, I stop.
Brother Nadeem, if you can make the offer us so we can finish, inshallah.
And inshallah, jazakallah khair for having us and to continue the great work. Please, everybody, do your best to recruit folks to join SISNA so we can create a large ecosystem of Islamic schools, and a lot of collaboration, a lot of different ideas can percolate. Inshallah, we can create a great fabric of Islamic education in the United States going forward, inshallah, and all over the world. So as SISNA continues to go other places, inshallah. سبحان الله وبحمده عدد خلقه وردات نفسي وزينة العرش ومداد كلماته حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت ورب العرش العظيم. Allah, we ask you to send us the reinforcements, send us the talent at every level of these institutions. This is a work of love and a work of ubudiyah to you. We are here just to serve you and to serve the Ummah of the Prophet ﷺ. We ask you to, all the work that is being doing, we ask you to accept from us, every single person here and every single person in the United States working in this field. We ask you to accept, we ask you to forgive us for any of the mistakes that we make as we struggle in this. We ask you to send us the great talent, the great hearts, the beautiful hearts, the great capable people that will run these institutions going forward. We ask you to fill them with beautiful hearts, people who love you, who love the Prophet ﷺ. We ask you to reward every single person in this. We ask you to give success, and we ask you to give success in SISNA and all the people that are working in SISNA, all the people who organize this for us, Sister Rabia, Sister Sophia, and everyone else on the board of SISNA who worked on this. And please, we ask you to, Ya Rab, we ask you to make these great institutions, make these institutions of light, of leadership, of at the forefront of all that is good, at the forefront of justice, forefront of academia, forefront of ubudiyah, forefront of worshiping you. ربنا آتينا في الدنيا حسنة حسنة عذاب النار. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي أزواج مع المؤمنين وذرياته وعلى بيته كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. العصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الحمد لله. جزاك الله خيرا إن شاء الله.
Assalamu alaikum.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.